What does it actually take to keep people safe? Welcome to the Thought Leader Product Safety Innovation Podcast. I'm Trevor J. Moronis, your host. Every day, products reach consumers with gaps that compliance alone can't catch. And the people working to close those gaps are the ones you'll hear from here. Each episode, we connect with leaders shaping product safety and public health, representing one of the four pillars driving real change: alliance, advocacy, awareness, and activism. Hi, I'm Trevor Moronis.
I'm Dr. Darren Detweiler, and we're two guys that have exciting backgrounds.
Hi, I'm Thea, the CEO and co-founder of PruneTech and our U.S. entity Ameritree, a transatlantic deep tech company that is operating at the intersection of agriculture, forestry, biotech, and climate resilience and workforce development. I also grew up on a farm and have become an agriculture economist looking to build and work on creating ripples of impact and operating at the intersection of systems for living infrastructure.
Thank you so much for joining us. How fast this has transpired. Andrew Rose was introducing us. Actually, I had a call with Andrew, and then Andrew said, "Hey, you got to be on this other call. I want you to be a part of this conversation with Thea." And it was so fantastic. Andrew actually removed himself from the call, said, "I got to be on something else," made us host. And then we extended the conversation for over an hour and a half with Ann Carr at this innovation initiative in Alabama. And then it sparked continued conversations. And obviously that's what led us here today. So super excited to get into building deep tech companies across agriculture, biotechnology, ecosystem resilience, and the importance of trusted partnerships when bringing new technologies to market. Your background is fascinating, not only from your dedication to being resilient as a runner, but as a hunter. There's so many different ways to go, but I want to just start off with one question about growing up on a farm. What inspired you on the farm and off the farm for your particular direction of this career path that's been of compounding so many different skills?
First of all, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate the invitation to join the conversation with you and Dr. Detweiler. It's been an incredible journey so far, and the more I dive into it and the more people I meet, I see how my experience of those complementary perspectives and activities that I grew up with and later on built a career on is resonating with so many professionals, like with Dr. Detweiler and yourself even, that we are able to now see the elements in the system based on the complexity and variety of experiences we've gathered. I grew up on my grandparents' farm in northwestern Romania, and I saw how their agriculture and food were not an industry. They were life. They were community. They were basically alliances of people in our village, and we were trading goods, and we were kind, compassionate, and aware of how we were spending and investing our resources. And later on, having been in the corporate world and touching upon an agrochemical company, I realized there's an entire world in agriculture, and that world is actually feeding everybody and making their lives easy and allowing them to become innovators, to become technologists and pioneers. And because of agriculture, I think economies are thriving and people are having the space to create and to support their communities.
Isn't it crazy how when you talk about food and agriculture with different people, you will have someone who looks at food like it's a widget, like it's a nuts and bolts kind of a widget kind of thing. And you have other people that will completely conceptualize food as an essential thread in our fabric of our lives and our communities and coming of age and societal connectedness. And I'm not saying that one perspective is wrong, the other one's right. But I think we often lose track that some people are farther distance wise from the source of their food, and some people are farther away, conceptualizing, if you will, in terms of how essential food and agriculture is to our lives. And I think that it's important to tell the stories. Here you talk about growing up on this farm. There's a lot of people that can't say, I grew up on this farm. And sometimes we have to remind them that there are people who do today still, their story, their life experience includes their different involvement with food. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
Likewise.
Well, I think that's a great opportunity to put a specific question in place about agricultural technology as an efficiency play. Some people have this perception that it's making things most efficient, where in doing homework for this conversation, you call agriculture a critical infrastructure. But what is the real world consequence if we get the framing wrong? Or what are the consequences when we do lose touch, like Dr. Detweiler was just saying?
That is, I love it. It's a very juicy question. I honestly believe that agriculture becomes critical infrastructure when people become aware of a shock or an event that is disturbing or disrupting their regular lives. Everything is, like, for example, food is taken for granted when it's on the shelves. And as Dr. Detweiler was mentioning, that this distance between people and the origin of their food has been increasing even in the past decade, especially. I've heard kids say that when they were asked where their food comes from, they said from the supermarket, for example, their vegetables. So I think we simply just realize how essential it is when it breaks. Yet, for example, when agriculture fails, there are food shortages, wildfires, or droughts, or supply chain disruptions, and workforce shortages that contribute to this failure. It's not just one system failing, it's all of those beneath what is commonly perceived as agriculture. And that's when all the eyes are looking at farmers, for example, or those initial elements at the beginning of the supply chain. Getting it wrong, or getting the framing wrong, I think it's about becoming preventative rather than just reactive. I can give a few examples from my region, whereas especially during the COVID pandemic, there were farmers who were in need of incentives and those necessary systems that would help them to feed their communities. So I think those were actual moments when people saw the necessity of a thriving and a fluid agriculture and supply chain. So agriculture, I believe, it intersects with water system, with energy, with trade, with public health, with national resilience. And basically what agriculture is working with is not just living infrastructure with living systems. It actually goes all the way to balance sheets and P&L reports, as I saw in the agrochemical company I was working with. All of those things transform into economy. And when we look at it that way, certain people may be activated to feel like, okay, there's something here that we can work with. It affects more links in the chain, and more of those links in the chain become aware that agriculture is such an essential point at any given moment, not just when it's critical.
That's a great point. And I'm glad you read out the pandemic, because I, at one point, had done a series of interviews with a remote area where before the pandemic, they had a lot of restaurants and the food was being shipped in from the normal distributors of foods. And all of a sudden there's the pandemic. They didn't have the tourists and travelers going to the restaurants. So the local people weren't working, and yet they also weren't bringing in the food from outside. And so there were certain farms in that area that now are saying, okay, how can we use the local workforce and say, well, these are the foods, ingredients we have. You work in restaurants. Can we figure out menus with these items? And also there were people who were not in that area in their homes that had like apple trees and other fruit bearing trees that weren't getting tended. So all of a sudden they were doing inventory of what food resources they had and what skill sets they have. And yes, there's momentum there during the pandemic. But what was amazing to me was, why did there have to be a pandemic for this local area to start thinking about their resiliency and reevaluating their people resources, their agriculture resources, their local needs? The senior citizens or the people who need food assistance, that kind of stuff. Why do we often wait until that disruption, like you very cleverly described? Why do we always do that? Why do we wait for there to be disruption to go, we should have been doing this all along?
That is an incredible question, because we oftentimes look at it after the fact. So that's why I was looking at preventative rather than reactive. So that, again, I love that you mentioned resilience, and this is one of the core the pillars of what we've been working on in the past few years, because, and I'm a huge fan of the concept of anti-fragility, and it's right there next to resilience. In my mind, different concepts, yet I think a society and a community can become anti-fragile, but it first has to be proven as resilient. And to do that, we have to be aware of all of these systems that make a community run. It's through conversations like ours, through education, through knowledge transfer, through know-how and articles, publication, content that reaches the right people, and people in general, actually, especially children. And so that they can see how it's not just enough to know that food is coming. It's how it's done, because you're able to empathize with your fellow community members when you know the work that they're doing. And I think one of the most amazing human feelings is that being recognized, your efforts being recognized. So everybody, I believe, loves this, and having their work being seen, let alone valued. For example, agriculture is one of the most valuable ones because it feeds people. It allows life to move on. So when you're asking why, it's mostly, in my mind, that it's in need of more recognition.
Yeah, I'll take it perhaps one additional step, in that sometimes that recognition is delayed, but there is a tendency to say, how much is it going to cost to do this? And to look at things economically and say, we're going to save money if we do this the convenient way. We're going to save a lot of money if we have this brought in. We're going to save money if we do this. But those are under favorable or ideal conditions. When those conditions change, right, all of a sudden, all the convenience doesn't do you any good if you're left with a different set of resources or challenges. And now that convenience was only really convenient in this specific set of circumstances or these specific conditions. And what we find is people forget that you may not be vulnerable at this point in your life, but at some point you may become pregnant. You may have a compromised immune system. You may become older, and now you're more vulnerable. You may not find yourself having a problem in terms of access to grocery stores or to food distribution systems now, but during a pandemic, during a during a major storm or whatever, all of a sudden when you have these disruptions, people are freaking out because guess what? They only had so much ready to eat, food in their house, as opposed to, well, if you had some cans of this and some dry of that and the ability to do this on your own, or if you were growing these things in your own on your own property, you would have had some resources, but those weren't convenient. Now they're a necessity, right? We don't think about that.
I entirely agree. And it took me to connect to emergency preparedness, of course. And listening to you speak, I was seeing that, and following on Trevor's question about getting the framing wrong, is that the way that agriculture has been done until now, it has been made so it's optimized for efficiency. Yet, given the rate at the world in which the world is changing, human behavior is changing, the landscape is changing, and implicitly, it has to adapt. This whole system and the way that it's working in agriculture has to shift from optimizing for efficiency toward resilience, because what got us here won't get us to a future that we want to have. I mean, in order to do that, I believe we have to take more into account the ways in which food is currently getting to people, of course, the way in which it's grown, the soil, and since terrain is the only limited, it's limited, we have to use it in a very meaningful and mindful way, so that what we already have is not just depleted, it's being regenerated.
Great point.
You use the term regenerative, and that made me immediately think of being a steward of these particular things. And in the beginning, you talked about the awareness of the community. And a little bit later, right before the pandemic, you were getting into having alliances. So how are we using these opportunities, learning from real world events to actually reshape how we're doing advocacy in connecting to individuals?
I love that question. You've touched on these points, advocacy and alliance. These are so close to my heart because the initiative that we launched 2 years ago, that came in, like it's a natural consequence of the conversations that I've been having in this past decade of working in agriculture and corporates, with governments, with startups and programs, and across the European Union and North America and Asia Pacific. And these alliances, the conversations between people and organizations, individuals, including and professionals, or people who were just passionate, have translated into the Agri-Ally initiative that we launched 2 years ago. And it's just the morsel of movement that is aimed at involving people for this cause that is benefiting everybody. Because if you look at all sorts of activism campaigns, when we were talking about agriculture, this is literally something everybody can get behind, because food is essential to everybody, no exception. So these alliances are now, I believe, becoming stronger. They're becoming, I think they're actually multiplying, because people are starting to see their value and the values in communities. And when the weight of this responsibility of feeding the world is being dispersed horizontally so that more communities take on the responsibility, I think it eases that burden. And those alliances are absolutely necessary. And when it comes to advocacy, one of the easiest things that I see is that we advocate for people who have built careers, who have worked on their segments all their lives, or have begun working in certain segments just now, and they're putting all their energy and passion into it, and that it's starting to move more and more, and advocating for people like this, for youth, for students, for women, for veterans. I think it's one of the most amazing things that we can do on an individual and on a professional level.
I love this. I you're preaching to the choir here. So I I am so grateful for this opportunity. I am also trying to not get too excited and take us off a tangent where we then end up having a conversation that comes into like multiple. We can have multiple conversations, but we'll do so in a manner where I don't lose focus. When you just said something specifically about across Europe and Asia Pacific, we were talking about the United States in a previous conversation with the initiative out of Alabama. But what are real world examples that show how serious the wildfire and land resilience problems have become, not just here in the United States, but throughout?
Well, this question it's so encapsulating. It's literally a burning need nowadays. And as Dr. Detweiler was mentioning earlier, why do we begin to seek out solutions when it's already burning? I know that usually being reactive is oftentimes the way that products are made, innovation is created. Need is another prerequisite, the catalyst of innovation. Yet, I do believe that from everything that we've learned so far throughout history and throughout recent events, I think the velocity with which preventative actions and products and reactions actually actions are happening to prevent them is starting to increase. So that velocity is increasing. There are programs across the world that are focusing on wildfire detection and mitigation. For example, of course, in the US, especially because we've focused our attention on the situations across the US, especially with the fires from the Pacific Northwest. And we realized that there was this burning need for solutions, whether they were preventative, to mitigate, and to restore, because we're not just talking about wildfires that have happened, that are happening, and that will happen, but we have to think and have in mind what's going to happen after they're over. And the situation is similar in many geographies. The ones that I'm mostly familiar with is through Spain. I used to live in Spain, and actually there I was witnessing a prescribed burn so that they would mitigate the impact that wildfires may have on the biodiversity there, and of course through our communities, because it was affecting communities. And these are just some ways and some regions, the way they were doing it in order to mitigate the effects. So it's actually a way for me to look at the positive side, that through these events that have been sparking more and more in the past couple of years is actually giving the right foundation to organizations, to governments, to public and private ecosystems to start thinking about solutions and not just reactive ones. So when we're talking about wildfires, I've encountered several programs that are focusing on boosting startups that are providing solutions in the space, or sensing technologies and so on, or biotechnologies like ours.
The kind of controlled burn, it's very easy to look at that in terms of, wow, how does that really benefit? And doesn't that take away from something, or those kind of steps? I think that when we continue to distance ourselves from our food sources, it's very easy to get locked into the idea there's the past and the present and the future. And the present is not just the harvest and the manufacturing of food. The present should also be the idea of uh, operational awareness, operational notices, operational reassessment, looking at the idea of redefining what's foreseeable, um, and in any kind of sustainability, not just sustainability of food, but sustainability of business, sustainability of the act of agriculture. We have to take those into consideration. You go back in time, and that was what stores are being passed down in generations of people who owned land or people who at least were using land for agriculture. And today, there's too many times where it seems like we're just learning about these things for the first time. We were never paying attention, apparently, to these repeated and seemingly endless cycle of repeated, in some cases, failures in reform. And there has to be a healthy investment into that continual development of operational awareness and reassessment that goes along. And you can't talk about efficiency without saying that it may be efficient economically to use all our land all the time, but the land is still the land. We need to allow some of the land to go unused for a while so that we don't destroy the soil and what's good about the soil. We need to invest into the soil. We need to invest into our irrigation. If you're not doing that, then what you're doing is you're ignoring the past, focusing on the maximum efficiency of the current, the present, and you're kind of pushing all the future problems onto someone else. That's the way I look at it.
That's well said. And that takes me back to time that we spent in Hawaii with a client who really practices stewardship of not only agriculture for the land, but agriculture from the sea, and giving back to the land and showing respect for it. And it wasn't until in the last few years that the access deer has become an interest for the communities as well as the state of Hawaii to say the access deer that's been here for so long has actually destroyed so much of the agriculture. It's doing the reverse of what we want and need. And therefore, there's been an initiative to go out and hunt these access deer, which is just a very small portion of people are actually going out to hunt these particular things. But the devastation that's been created to remove the topsoil that allows the rain to remove nutrients from the ground and also is becoming a catalyst for fires in many different cases. It's really interesting because we've known about this for so long, but it's only recently become a part of our attention. So how are we going to put intention into creating long-term solutions? This was kind of at the beginning when we were doing some introductions outside of recording, but I thought it was so fascinating how both of you were touching base in depth on building advocates in the next generation of individuals. And I don't just mean the younger generation, but veterans coming back to be a part of the workforce, women, or even connecting with those in schools, whether it be adolescent, elementary, middle school, or even high school, because that's a great way for us to build trust going forward. And that's really critical for us. But what is one way that you connect with individuals, whether they're veterans or individuals saying, I have an interest in this? What's one way that you connect with them?
Trevor, I have to say that you've touched on a few aspects that are really close to my heart, especially trust and intentionality. It's and Dr. Detweiler was mentioning earlier about healthy building of the next steps. And what I believe is healthy is being intentional with the actions and with the interactions, with the connections that we make with people beyond our industry. For example, I've always had this appetite and this curiosity to understand the systems that converge through and with agriculture. So whether we're talking about technology, about the food system, about processing, logistics, transport, business development, technology from soil to space, and everything in between. All of these systems are interconnected, and of course, inherently, the people that are supporting them. My appetite for seeing these and understanding and incorporating these systems as much as possible has taken me to, for example, learning more about the military systems and operating procedures. And Dr. Detweiler was mentioning earlier about when we're talking about operations in agriculture, there has to be discipline. And it's something that has helped me structure what we do at the startup with the AgriAli initiative and the podcast also, and through all my my support for the agri-food community and ecosystem. And this is why I believe they're transferable in many, many ways. And when we're doing our work intentionally, it's impossible not to learn from other systems. Again, it's when you mentioned veterans, for me it's absolutely obvious that the skills that veterans can bring to agriculture are so applicable and so useful and so supportive that I've made it my purpose to see how we can include and basically involve veterans and women and youth into agriculture. And when I say agriculture, everything regarding science, technology, maths, everything, engineering, logistics, all those pieces in the puzzle. And this is where the interoperability, I believe, comes into play, where veterans can support agriculture and agriculture can give more to veterans.
It's as if you described a roadmap to say, here is a web of opportunities. And it's not just stopping at farm gate. These things are interconnected, whether there's technology already in place or not. There's people to help create these connections throughout the process. And in communication, we can really start to see how these things are built amongst the world. It's very, very fascinating.
Absolutely.
You have described founders deploying technology in a vacuum, ecosystem builders working in ecosystems they do not know, and investors trusting signals that never met field reality. Which of those three concern you the most currently, and why? And this stems because of the investor comment and then the component of trust that we were touching on.
That is, again, the suite of questions that you have placed so far is incredible. Since I started my career, like my first job ever, I realized that, of course, nobody is existing in a vacuum, especially in a society where we have technology advancing so much as the way we have it now. So the thing is that technology fails every day, basically. The one thing that does stay the same is that human decisions will always be there. And you've touched on stewardship earlier, and I want to bring that as well into the conversation, because whenever any kind of company is building or entering a market, and it's from my experience from building go-to-market strategies for the past 10 years, I've seen that the most successful ones are actually involved and aware of all those ripples of impact that they're creating through their technology, and what's touching on the immediate sphere of their target customers or users. And it's something that Dr. Detweiler was mentioning at the beginning, is that through a very diverse perspective, you can be of more service to the community and through the work that we're doing. This is what I mean when no founder is building in a vacuum. So when we're building PruneTech and our US entity, Ameritree, we're taking into account growers and not just the economic ecosystem in which they're activating. Because when we're talking about growers, we're talking about the ecosystem, the economic and incentives that they receive from the government, their distribution chain, the consumers, marketing. We're talking about so many layers that come into play when we're talking about agri-food and food production. And I think, and I know actually, that when a founder is connected to all of those parts and pieces on the web, then you will always know exactly how to deploy, when to deploy, and what's the distribution system for that. And you know what are the pieces that you need to put together. So whether it's an investor that has to be aware of the impact of a startup technology, that I think that's the juicy spot. That's an ideal. That's actually something, an objective that I believe professionals, whether they're founders, investors, innovators, they have to have the tendency to aim for that, to understand as much as the canvas as possible, because that way they'll be able to serve more of the community, of the area, of the ecosystem. And this applies to all of the players you mentioned earlier, in my view.
Something that you touched on really resonates with me, because you were talking about, your purpose and identifying it. And then separately, you said being of service. And that's something that I've recently found through training with a coach. I'm not present for myself. I'm present to be of service for others and to help elevate performances through whatever it is that they're weathering. If it's putting on shoes to go for a walk, or understanding how nutrition can be impactful to health, or if it's, I was sitting next to a nurse on the airplane, and they had asked me, even though the sun was down, do you mind if the window's open? And I said, oh, no, I don't mind, but thank you for asking. And so I use this as a segue to say, I saw a funny thing on LinkedIn with hand sanitizer, a box of gloves, for somebody to say that this is how it is in a hospital. I have this conversation often with individuals about hand sanitation and gloves and food safety principles as basics. Now, if you're a nurse, do you agree that this is actually how it is in hospitals? And I was just curious what would come of that conversation. And I think she was ready for a nap because she had just come off like 410. So she just kind of chuckled and said, yeah. I was like, oh, okay, well, enjoy your nap.
You bring up conversations, and I think that a lot of what I heard here already, you could almost look at, there's different kinds of conversations. There are people that look at the idea of ownership and rights and freedom and privilege and the ability to abuse, use as part of efficiency, right? If I want to be most efficient, I want to gain the most resources from this. I want to get the most money from this. I want to do this, right? This is how I do this. But there's another camp that looks at things in terms of stewardship, in terms of giving back, in terms of being in service. Even the idea of never losing track of the fact that we're only borrowing the land that we're on right now, the land that we're using right now, the time that we have with our family, the time that we have the ability to do these different things. I think some people completely lose track of that fact that we're only borrowing these things right now. And at some point, you know what, we're going to have to give it back. And ideally, we give it back in a better condition than it was when we took it, if you will, or when we started borrowing it. And I think that when we start to talk about food and agriculture, even like cybersecurity and data and ownership of information, that kind of stuff. If we talk about things in a kind of, let's make sure before we have this conversation that we talk about stewardship, borrowing, giving back, being in service, that kind of approach, as opposed to strip it, sell it, maximize it, abuse it kind of a thing, you're going to find people will gravitate towards one or the other. And you start kind of going, oh, here's who I'm talking to. Here's the conversation we need to have now. And not everyone's having the same conversation. Or at least they're coming at it from that same perspective of what does it mean to own this land? Or what does it mean to be in this leadership role for a company? And it's like, look, you know what? Even the role you have, the title you have for a company is only temporary.
Of course. I mean, as you mentioned, ideally we would be able to give it back better than we've found it. I think that's the purpose of, or at least should be the purpose of every startup founder, beyond, of course, other organizations that are focusing their efforts and energies and resources on activism and advocacy, and basically doing those actions to make their borrowed time and space better off than they found it. And I think this is kind of the root of startups and innovation, to create products that actually serve this.
True. I mean, right now, as we're recording this, we're kind of at the end of a week of crazy flip-flop news about cyclospora and the greater industrial complex that is shredded lettuce in the United States. Paying attention to social media, you'll find that people are surprised that, oh, this is how it's done, and this is who owns this, and here's how it distributes. But I think that the other part of the conversation is, well, there's these companies that are losing their business, or blah blah blah. They should be able to sell these things. We have to remember that the underlying foundation is, it's not food unless it's safe food. It's not a commodity unless it's a safe commodity. It's not an industry unless the underlying components of that industry are protected, and that our consumers, our customers, our business partners are also protected along this journey, whether it be the journey of food or even the journey of information around food. And I think that Trevor, chime in if you've seen this as well. I think more of the conversations has nothing to do with cyclospora itself, and has to do with what we are in large sectors of our population now coming to realize is, what is this big spider web of connectivity, and who owns what, and where it's distributed to, and where things come from. Because we are so far away from just going to the grocery store and buying a head of lettuce, kind of a thing. I think that what this whole cyclospora outbreak with shredded lettuce has exposed is that people would not be engaging in the social media conversations and asking questions if they didn't care, if they didn't ultimately value and prioritize that safe food and access to food is important to them. It'd just be, what's the next topic, move on kind of a thing. But the sheer amount of engagement on this topic, I think, reminds us that we are all connected in the fact that we're all consumers.
That's great. You set it up perfectly, because it's really important to ask questions and be curious and not jump to a conclusion based off of a previous set of posts or comments, or sometimes even news articles, but to continuously ask questions of, okay, where does this really come from? What are the surrounding infrastructures in place of where it came from? And then how did it ultimately get to its destination? And then how did it continue to go through transactions? Who else touched it? No pun intended, but it has to go through paperwork transitions, trucks, trailers, sitting at warehouses, these types of things. And it's interesting because Don was talking about in the early 2000s how they were looking at satellite maps of where things were cultivated and how the things upwind and downwind. Now, we can go into traceability in a second, but how things around have an impact, and then the seasons have an impact and the shift. And there's been discussion to those who can, at a leadership level, make decisions, and there's been decisions to kind of put them in a direction that's caused them more headache and havoc. Though we'll take these situations that are becoming unfortunate with so many people becoming ill to use it as a topic in a case study and further conversation to continuously ask questions. What else are we missing here? What have we not learned, or what have we learned from the data? What is truly trending? And that's not based off of opinions, but factual, concrete evidence, which I did a little bit of research, and I understand that you worked with a Japanese manufacturer of plant protection products, and you said their certification process resembles pharma, which is very fascinating for me because as a patient, I like to nerd out in the world of pharma, but especially because of active ingredients, which another story for another time, but active ingredients didn't really provide me with what I needed as a patient. So I had to start looking for alternatives. But where does compliance actually break down when technology meets an old sector? Because you talked about innovation, and I thought, what a great way for us to bring this back into the conversation and really massage more on innovation, where new is meeting old, and then how that has an impact for the world of compliance, because compliance is not just to check a box.
That is an amazing transition, and you've touched on such essential topics. When you're saying old sector, I want to clarify this. Are you meaning agriculture?
It can be, we could start with agriculture, but for active pharmaceutical ingredients, it makes the most sense to start there, but we can expand on it, throughout the supply chain.
Well, to answer your very amazing question, and I believe all the questions that you're asking throughout our conversation are really gauging perspectives that have not been, or at least not this way, approached so far on these specific segments. So yes, of course, when we were talking about active ingredients, we're also, of course, talking about pharma, biotech, and agriculture inherently. And of course, it's a way to move quickly through addressing a need or a problem, whether we're talking about active ingredients or just overall a solution to a problem, whether through technology, those active ingredients, or so on. One element is that I believe the stakeholders have to be linked, and the translation between the needs and the expectations has to be done. And also, I think an assessment of the actual needs has to be very, very comprehensively and diligently done beforehand. Because whether we're talking about the regulatory system or compliance, actually, in technology as in active ingredients, time is something that is the number one element that we have to go against, so to speak. Against in a way that we can't make more time. And trials take a lot of time. There are tests that have to be done so as to make sure that it is safe. We were talking earlier about food safety. That's why a lot of products sometimes fail, whether we're talking about plant protection products or otherwise. That's why there are labels and specific instructions, and agriculture actually does carry a lot of this. I don't know how to put it now, that it bears a lot of these consequences of using certain products incorrectly. And that is where there have to be experts. There have to be people that are responsible with oversight and with educating all of those stakeholders that are involved in that chain. So I'm going to give a concrete example. My first job in agriculture with a Japanese company involved me implementing my master's thesis that was focusing on job rotation in it's a Japanese concept, and I loved that I had the blessing and opportunity to do that in that company, which happened to be Japanese. And basically, I insisted on having around 1 up to 3 months per department to understand every department and how it works in the grander scheme of the whole company, the life science division, and eventually in the corporation itself, which is one of the longest standing corporations in the world. And the sheer clarity that I received and how I was able to understand and empathize and see how the departments were working, the people were working, how the perspectives were all complementing each other. That is how I was able to understand that, like the butterfly effect. If something happens in accounting that is either stuck, it can ripple all the way into the certification process, or vice versa, or from the certification process can halt the entire activity of a company if something changes, whether it changes on a company level, on a production and manufacturing level, or at a regulatory level. For example, rescinding permission to use a specific active ingredient would significantly cut a large portion of business. So we're talking about the economic side as well as the food safety and, of course, human health and human safety. I'm hoping that answers at least a part of the question.
Oh, I think it does answer part of the question, and I think it opens up more. I was taking some notes, but I know that Dr. Darren Detweiler had something to say.
I was looking at your, I want to say your bow behind you. You have archery.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I was sitting here trying to think about the idea of there's companies I work with that they basically hire a lawyer, someone who has only been, in university and in industrial settings in the city kind of a thing. And then there's people who've actually got experience on the farm or experience with hunting or experience with athletics or whatever kind of a thing. And how the rotation of workers who go, instead of working every day at this one thing, maybe after a while they switch to another department and kind of do the round robin of trading things. Having that diversity of skills is extremely important for a leader. I don't want to stress you out here, but I would love for you to think about your hunting. What would be a lesson that a leader could take from hunting, from archery, from having grown up on a farm that you can't necessarily teach in a textbook or in a graduate course at a university kind of a thing?
Wow, that is glorious. First of all, what a way to put all those together. I think the one thing that I keep with me every day, I think about it every day, is that staying curious is a healthy foundation for a leader, for any person wishing to give and be the best in that segment that they're looking to do work in. And this also allows space for saying, basically, we don't know that yet. We're still learning. We're human. We have a finite comprehension of the world, yet we don't know what we don't know. And I think curiosity and evergreen curiosity is something that will always make room for authentic connections, for more discovery, for learning, for just genuine connection and impact.
Wow.
And that, I think that kind of reads more innovation. It is something that allows for responsible decision making, to understand those with whom you're working. It's something that begins with being intellectually humble.
You brought up with curiosity something that I recently ran into in that I just recently had a recent TED Talk came out on video. I talk about the certainty gap, that idea of the span of time between when we know we need to do something and when we actually act.
Mm.
And someone goes, so we don't want to have a certainty gap. I'm like, actually, no. A certainty gap is curiosity. I mean, it is important. We can never have no certainty gap. It's just that there's too many leaders who will be like, well, I'm in the certainty gap, and they'll stay there for a year or two or whatever. And you'll allow this collection of red flags, and then you won't act on it until there's some headline about an outbreak or a headline about some hospitalizations or deaths. When, it's like, okay, we could have shortened up this certainty gap a little bit. It's good to be curious. It's good to want to have certainty, but at some point you need to turn data into actionable information, and you need to act on that information.
Absolutely.
So you have to have it both. You can't have no gap. You have to have a gap, as long as it's curiosity that has a means to an end, in terms of the idea of you're getting to something with that curiosity. It's almost as if, again, you're living on borrowed time, if you will, with this curiosity, because at some point you need to move on and take action based on that curiosity, or you're just stalling everything, including the people around you.
Or you're stuck in analysis paralysis.
Yes.
It's my motto is done is the engine of more. And the curiosity layer is that I'm consistently asking myself, what more is there either to be done or to be learned? And again, as you mentioned, action is the essential aspect you can actually do, rather than accumulate data, because that can be done infinitely. So absolutely, I believe that, actually, better yet, I'll give an example. We're at Prune Tech. We realized that there was an issue with how people were managing their fruit trees. And we started with pruning. What we observed was an action that had to be done every year, at least once. And that's where we found our wedge. It's not the last step. It's not where we're stopping with what we're doing. It's merely the first action that leads to the ripple effects and the steps in the process, the steps in the roadmap, where we're taking these actions. So it's basically operating, deciding, and doing on the information that we've noticed, the problem that we saw, and now we're acting on a solution. And we're building toward the future, and toward becoming actual stewards. Also, of course, by doing.
Well, I have to tell you, this has been an incredible conversation. I mean, we've really taken a very wide brush view here at the idea of two completely different leaders and a leadership perspective or characteristic in terms of how you're describing it. And I've got to ask you. I know I'm not alone in this. I know Trevor gets these questions too. There are certain people who, when you try to explain who you are or what you do, you realize that there's no way it's going to fit on a business card. Everyone wants it to fit on a business card, but you can only put so much information on a business card. There's only so much room. How do you explain to other people the complexity of what you really do? Are you able to tie it in a very simple bow, or are you taking a larger approach to it in terms of, in lieu of my 175-page CV, I'll explain it this way?
Actually, I can. We've circled this word a lot in our conversation, and what I found more and more throughout my personal and professional life is the word steward. And through stewardship, which of course involves doing beyond having aligned principles and values, it's something that I've been consistently doing for the better part of a decade. And it seems, whether I've been aware of it or have people come to me and mention how I've supported their journeys and clarity, I notice that it's actually stewardship that I've subconsciously done through these past 10 years. So I'm taking interactions with students, with people who, experts, professionals who work in startups, from the regulatory environment, builders and ecosystem facilitators, growers, entrepreneurship organizations from across the world, accelerators, and professionals like you, universities, and translating and supporting the interoperability of these systems and of these people and putting them together, forming those alliances and stewarding them where the needs are most dire or most burning, or actually catalyzing, because you've mentioned this earlier, catalyzing the potential of the people that I interacted with.
Wow.
So that is something that I can answer your question with, is stewardship.
I really love that, because Darren was just sharing how his connection with students and how he'll still connect or continue to engage with them. And then they come back to say, you've made such a big impact on my life. And that's really important and powerful, and being of service. Now, Dr. Detweiler was in the military, so he's got a whole different set of level of service and dedication and training that he went through, rigorous things, which also create really fantastic stories. Talk about being prepared and owning parts of things and helping others, reacting in the moment rather than reacting later.
Absolutely. And I've noticed this throughout our conversation. And Dr. Detweiler was mentioning earlier how how that cornucopia of experiences allows him to be of more service now. And what more could you want in this world than to be more of service to the people that surround you?
Well, what's crazy is that being of service when I was in my 20s is different than being of service now I'm in my 50s. Not that I'm trying to tell everyone exactly how old I am, because you all think I'm still in my 20s. But, you were talking about stewardship, and I want to make sure Trevor gets a shot at this too. I would have to say that I've learned to become what I've best described as being the conductor. I cannot play every instrument in an orchestra. I can play a lot of them, but I can bring together the potential of many different people within the different sections of an orchestra, with the different ranges of music, with the different specificalities of the instruments, and I can help people find that opportunity to be effective and to harmonize such that an audience, the world, can now benefit and appreciate the sum total of this work. And I can bring together, people who I knew from this sector, I knew from that sector, I knew from this experience or that experience, and allow that synergy, that harmony, and even support the balance and help them with their volume, such that, again, now it's bringing this to a different audience. And I'm not really talking about music, believe it or not, but I realize that having a background in music allows me to see that as an easy way to describe myself, as being kind of in that middle between the orchestra and the audience, and to pull that together and achieve much more than I can ever achieve on my own. And that's how I look at my role. Trevor, how do you look at your service or your work?
I most often tell people that I'm a coach. I can help you with the teaching and the training, and in combination, you're going to get coaching out of this, where you're going to identify how you can tap into a deeper part of yourself and realize that you have been a leader all this time. And through the transformation and the commitment, in the Bushido way, the way of the warrior, we say chop wood and carry water. But through these particular practices over time, we can get new habits. And what once seemed so foreign becomes second nature. And when we need the effective team to be present, we're going to communicate with them. What is working? What isn't working? What is the intention of this particular action or conversation and being set up in preparation? We don't have, we start to take what we've learned from executive coaches that have trained Formula One athletes, NBA athletes, NFL athletes, and then some very big tech operations throughout Silicon Valley. And it's the same fundamental principles and practice. So we let them know that there's not a bunch of acronyms and jargon that they have to pick up on. They're going to pick up things as they go. And being a student of life, when their acceptance of this, then they're more willing to then become a coach for others. So that as they are leveling up, like they do in jiu-jitsu for a new belt color, then they get to go and start being a coach themselves. They may not have that certification as a coach, but they're actually putting in the work to facilitate those things. And through that transformation, then they're more open, which I have to constantly remind myself, I am still a student to life. So I am staying curious. What can I learn? What can I read? What can I write about? And who can I share it with to get some input? Am I on course here? Did I have the correct audience in mind, or am I seeing this completely different?
Wow. It seems like we are three people that the work we do is not something that is in one of those books of this is the job, take this class and have this job title kind of thing. This is you were using the word transform, be curious, evolve, all these different things. We've had to go through these building evolution of experiences and personal growth in order to do the things that we do. And I think that sometimes the hard part is, at least for me, is convincing some people of the value. It's not my time. My time is not what's of value, if you will, like time on the clock, time in a cubicle or whatever, it is the decades of experience that I bring into this and the networks that I bring into it. And it sounds like the same thing for all three of us, that idea of the value that can be brought by people who have remained curious, who've remained in service, who remained under this category of being borrowers.
We're going through this thing called life, which in itself is a masterclass that is not available to anybody other than the individual that's willing to participate and play.
Yep. Very good.
That sounds amazing. It feels like so in sync.
I have a couple more questions for you, but you've raised trusted partnerships as central to bringing in new technology to market. And if we think about the 4 pillars that we have for this specific podcast: awareness, alliance, advocacy, and activism, where is the biggest gap today, and what happens next? Where do we need to cultivate or orchestrate the next solution? And it's not just one and done, but I'm curious from your perspective now, what your response is.
Wow. Really, you're nailing all these questions. I love this, especially how we're talking about interoperability and alliances. And what I've seen is that there isn't a lack in innovation or in funding or in one specific element. It's that we have all of these systems, whether they're accelerators, programs, they're test farms, institutions, founders, R&D, growers, investors, and universities, and policymakers, because everything has to include that. And all of these pieces, what are they without one another? And I think the collaboration between them, the interoperability, allows them to have this communication and to make this system stronger and better. So in all of the pillars, I believe alliance is the most essential, because alliances are formed when different people, different organizations come together toward a shared purpose. And this leads me toward all of the players I mentioned earlier in the layers, but also the category of people. Of course, we're talking about founders, growers, experts like you, about women, youth, students, veterans, and involving them in each other's activities and including their capabilities is a way to ensure that we have the necessary resources and perspectives to build the future that we're looking to live, whether it's during our lifetime or beyond that. I like a lot the saying, plant the seeds of trees in the shade of which you may never live to stay in. And it's something that has really stayed with me since the beginning of our startup mission, because it involves so many of these links in the system, whether we're talking about ecosystem resilience, about food security, and how we ensure food security and safety, and emergency response. And in all of these, which are obviously super connected, and beginning to be obvious more and more, what is the support system on which those actually rely on? And it's all of those pieces, individual pieces, coming together in alliance and in cohesion, as Dr. Detweiler was mentioning earlier, through his role as a conductor to bring on this cohesion. And I think it's absolutely amazing to just bring people and systems together. And then technology is something that's just like the cherry on top. And it starts working when the pieces in the system actually work together. So this is where we have, beyond collaboration between people and organizations and within communities, we are able to have collaborative autonomy between technologies and countries and ecosystems. So it's like the ripples are endless here.
Collaborative autonomy. We have our tradition of this particular podcast is to, who would you suggest that we have on as a guest, or it can be several guests that you think, but who is going to be a part of the next collaborative autonomy?
As in a guest?
As a guest, do you have a recommendation? Is there somebody that's really caught your attention, that represents one of the 4 pillars of awareness, advocacy, alliance, or activism?
Well, the first person to come to mind is the first person you mentioned, which is Andrew Rose, because he is an extremely efficient advocate for people who are creating so much impact in their respective domains. And he has this gift of seeing beyond either social media or what people are able to show, because we all do so much work that is unseen, unsung, so to speak. And it's a way, and it brings me actually to the pillar of alliance, that we become allies to each other and advocate for each other moving forward, not just among the systems that are existing, but toward creating new systems. So Andrew would definitely be first to mind.
I talked to him yesterday, so I'll be certain to let him know today. I'll call him back and say, just so you know. But cherry on top, Dr. Detweiler, this is a cherry on top for you. I can officially let you know that Thea has agreed to be with us in the summit.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. That's coming up.
Yeah.
We're only weeks away.
Yeah, August 14th. We just got
August what?
August 14th.
What? August 14th. It's so close.
20 days or 19. I don't know. I just got off the plane, so it's a little blurry.
And I'm about to get on a plane.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
And you're right by a plane.
This is fantastic. I want to not only extend this conversation into the summit, but I would love to have you back on because I think we can also cover more. There's so much more real estate and things to connect on, as well as help share a message to the communities that we are within. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, especially at the end of the evening. It's a pleasure to have you. I really appreciate it.
I'm enormously grateful for your time and for allowing me to discover more about your passions and your experiences. It's actually the way that I'm receiving the ripples that you've created from all the work that you've done so far, and I'm now able to share them forward. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that can happen. I'm excited.
It was really great to talk with you.
Likewise, Dr. Detweiler.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Thought Leader Product Safety Innovation Podcast. If this conversation raised new questions or perspectives, we invite you to continue with us at the upcoming Thought Leader Summit this summer. You can find more details in the show notes. Until next time, keep asking the questions that matter.